I am Heather Robertson, and I want to welcome you to this panel on the history and future of uncompromising commitment to democracy, human rights, and media freedoms. The idea behind this panel is to introduce some partner organizations, introduce some incredible experts in the field, and to share best practices, share what we have learned, think about making some recommendations. And on that, I have good news and I have good news, which is that we have collected over 120 recommendations so far from these panels and also from our roundtables yesterday. So if you look at your agenda, it says that we will be reading these recommendations and discussing them at 4:30. Clearly, I don't think that would happen even if we only had 10 recommendations, but we have so many that we will be writing them up and putting them together in a document. We invite, I'm not sure if Jabir's mic is on, but we'll invite you to send your recommendations in to Civil. Yes, please. Oh, okay.
There.
Okay. Oh, good.
Okay. So, if I may pop in, please, in the very beginning. Actually, so far we have 120 and counting recommendations, starting with the workshop that thank you of tomorrow, of yesterday, and all the way today. All the speakers. The great and diligent team of civil and civil media over there was picking up recommendations all day and adding them to a real robust document, together with your interventions, presentations, and speeches that will be offered to you for editing sometime in January. It will compose a big publication produced by us and Media Dialogue and Youth for Media, with the support of our newly joined partner, the new European People's Forum, and a great many other intellectuals who are already being recruited in this whole process, in this initiative, because this is an initiative, it's not a project or a one-off conference. Thank you. Sorry for hopping in.
That's wonderful. So as I was saying, this panel is about exchanging ideas and best practices. And when I was listening to the previous panel, what Katerina Pavlova said during that panel really resonated with me. And that is that there's sort of this persistent idea that countries in this region and in Eastern Europe should learn from kind of these high-level experts that come from elsewhere, and that actually there's much to learn from the people in these regions. And so I know that's why I keep coming back to the Balkans and to North Macedonia, is to watch and learn how people can be brought together across differences in the context of war, not just recent war and ongoing war, but a long history as well, and be brought into the same rooms and to see if they can find some common ground. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I want to start with Professor Edward P. Joseph, who we are very honored to have here today. He is coming to us from, I hope you can all hear me, from SAIS in the United States. That is a wonderful institution where people like Professor Joseph can teach conflict management, of which he is an expert. Professor Joseph has more than 12 years of on-the-ground experience in the Balkans, negotiating, including negotiating between Serbs and Kosovar Albanians. So I think I want to start with you. I have so many questions that I would really like to ask you. But I just think, given what we have talked about today in terms of polarization, anti-democratic forces, media disinformation, all of these things, if you were to kind of be able to collect, a group of actors into a room for a negotiation to be able to resolve these issues that the region faces now. Who would you bring into that room? What kinds of things might you talk about? And what resolution would you drive towards?
Heather, I actually have a direct answer to Heather's excellent question. I don't know if it's the one really for this theme that we have today, but there is actually an answer. There is an answer to the difficulties in the Balkans. There is actually a clear answer, Heather. First, I want to thank Jabber for this organizing this outstanding conference. Really exceptional, and yes, and Wolfgang as well. And thank you for the invitation here. Quickly, I'm gonna. This is the last panel. I'm gonna end the way it began with my good friend and co-director, Sasha Ordanovsky. You mentioned recommendations, so we have them, and this are broader than the content. I just want to emphasize what we did. We just are coming now from NATO headquarters. We have discussed these in depth with the new Deputy Secretary General, Radmila Shekarinska, here, the former defense minister here, obviously well known, and I also had the honor not only to meet with Radmila, but also to present this to Secretary General Mark Rutte. So the point is this, Heather. It's not that you all need to dive in and get these recommendations. These are from youth leaders around the region. The point is to be concrete, to come to not just say, gee, EU, gee, NATO, there's a problem and so forth, but to really, what we asked these youth leaders from each of the WB6, including North Macedonia, plus 2 SAIS students, was, what should NATO do? And let me tell you, they are very interested. You think, they went up there pro forma. No. We were there. I won't go into details, but let's just say Balkans were the topic of the day, of the very day that we were at NATO. So they are interested and they're concerned and they want ideas. And so my message is about recommendations is be concrete with them and be proactive in sharing them, and I'll share this with you. Now, to answer your question, I'm going to segue and give you the answer. You asked, gee, who would we talk to actually resolve and stabilize this? I would say the other point, Heather, that you're absolutely correct about is that there is a lot that we, the U.S. and EU together, NATO, can learn from this region. I think it's actually very interesting in many respects, the Balkans, and here's the key word, the Balkans have been a harbinger. It happened first in the Balkans, and then it happened everywhere else. It's actually a harbinger. Think back to the late 1980s. What was happening? Rest of Eastern Europe was completely quiet, calm. You had Slobodan Milosevic, you had Kosovo, you had the end of Kosovo autonomy, and guess what I'm going to remind you of? One of the most fundamental facts overlooked by so many officials. Removal of Kosovo's autonomy happened before the fall of the Berlin Wall, okay? So you had these processes in motion, which then, all of a sudden, the reawakening of history, all these ethno-national tensions, war, Russia and Ukraine, these type of aggressive power wars based on, in many respects, promoted and accentuated real differences, but then promoted and exploited by leaders like Milosevic, like Putin. So you have that, it's a harbinger. Is a harbinger here in North Macedonia. How? When? 2006? You had a new prime minister came in. I don't want to mention the name because it just becomes, it's unnecessary. But you had a prime minister who swiftly eroded the democratic constraints and essentially had the elements of what all autocratic powers want, to perpetual power. And then it was the wiretapping scandal and the protests, public protests in 2014, and then the Perugino Agreement 2015 that changed that. So that was again a harbinger really before Orban, before Viktor Orban. You had that model, that this electoral authoritarianism. You had that model here in North Macedonia. And so you see that. Then you had also, a false comparison. Many people lumped Montenegro and Milo Đukanović in this kind of, yes, there's Serbia and Vučić and so forth, but there's Đukanović in Montenegro too, and they're also, Freedom House had them, in a lower category and so forth. It turned out it wasn't true. It turned out that Milo Đukanović, his party, he and his party suffered a defeat. What did he do? He recognized the result. His party still exists, and there's a not so clear political formation and of course greater Serbian influence, but we see that it was fundamentally different. There wasn't this Đukanović, I'm going to burn the house down. If I'm not calling the shots, I'm going to burn it all down. No, he had been in coalition before, and he backed out. You can have criticisms and so forth, but we can also have these. Sometimes we get into these false comparisons, Heather. So let me. I'm going to. You asked your specific question, and I'm going to answer it with one of, I think, the most remarkable remarks, statements by a political figure in the Balkans that I can remember hearing in a long time. And this was by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić just 36 hours ago. He used this phrase. It was absolutely astonishing. I couldn't believe that he would go with this. He used this phrase. This is not exact quote because he used the words in the same sentence, but it's a completely fair paraphrase. This is a completely fair paraphrase. He said, "I am not Assad. I am not Assad." This is Aleksandar Vučić. Well, really? I thought this was absolutely astonishing that he would think to invoke such a comparison. He said, and then, of course, he turned it into his way. I will not run away. It was about the protests, and he turned it into an attempt to delegitimize the protesters, but in a very strange way. And it shows you, even very shrewd leaders, like with communications, like Aleksandar Vučić, can make mistakes. It's almost always a mistake to use those words, "I am not." We have the famous case in the United States, Richard Nixon saying, "I am not a crook." And this, you're invoking the negative. And you invoke the negative. You're invoking the comparison. You're inviting people to compare you with Assad. And what is the point of that? What is the point of the comparison? Is the hollowness of the autocrat, the hollowness of the base of power of the autocrats. That what seems so invincible today with the command of the media, of the courts, of the military, you heard in the previous panel, the arrests of journalists and things, what seems so invincible today can vanish like that. Whereas democracies, messy as they are, inefficient in many respects, they don't just often just crumble in a moment as the house of cards falls down. And so I think that's really a striking reminder, and it's striking again that Vučić invoked this himself, and I think in that respect he has invited us to make the comparison in that respect, and that we should take him up on that. Really, you're not Assad? Well, actually, we see this, and actually, we see that. Then, Heather, I'll be brief here. It's been, you've had an outstanding session, and these folks are truly dedicated to stay with us here to the final session. But I want to give the panelists, my co-panelists, a chance here. But let me just quickly, you asked, so I'll give you the answer. I've published this, I've spoken about this. There is a solution to the Balkans. The Balkans are in a state of artificial suspension, and there's no better example than this country here, North Macedonia, which has twice been held hostage by these ethno-national issues for which it is not culpable. It took the Prespa agreement with Greece to relieve the veto on the NATO path. I want to say here for the record, again, we're in Skopje, we're in the North Macedonia. The Prespa agreement is an outstanding agreement. It's fair. Greece made very important concessions that support the Macedonian identity and the strength and sovereignty of this country, which is very important. You now have this veto from Bulgaria. It's completely outrageous. It's against the takozvani, as the friendship agreement, the so-called friendship agreement, which Sofia has behaved in anything but in the spirit of that agreement, and it's wrong. So North Macedonia has qualified, and I have my view. I did some interviews here. I have my view about what the government should do on that, but it's clear the obstacle is not within the country, and of course that is the blockage from the reforms and all of the steps that would have propelled this country and vastly improved the corruption situation and so many other issues. So there's that. But closed. So what is the solution? Okay. The point I mentioned at the top about Alexander Vučić and Serbia and him saying, I am not Assad. I will put the point to you this way very clearly. You cannot have a democratic, stable Balkans with an anti-democratic Serbia, okay? It doesn't work, okay? And in part, it's just size. Okay? Serbia is the biggest of the WB6. It has the biggest economy of the WB6. If you take it in comparison to Montenegro, the smallest of the WB6, the Serbian GDP is 14 times. For Montenegro, its #1 trading partner, both exports and imports, is Serbia. Okay? So you do the math in any calculation, politically, economically. If Serbia is in this continuing neo-Greater Serbia posture, here the Serb world posture, and here again, we heard it in the last panel, here the pollution of the media sphere here with so many Serbian channels, you know, I think 90 on the cable, it's an enormous number, dozens that you get. This is a problem. This is a fundamental problem. So you cannot have this democratic advancement of the region with the largest country that has these interests in subverting neighbors, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Kosovo. We don't have time, but there is a solution. It's very clear. The solution is Kosovo. Serbia is able to sustain this position because of the exploitation of the Kosovo issue. Those of you who are interested, I published this in a fairly well with co-authors from Serbia, Kosovo, and the non-recognizers. The only reason, I will tell you, this is my theory, and I'll close here, Jabbar, and turn it back to Heather. The only reason this whole thing, including the Bulgaria-Greece situation, because it never would have happened but for the fact that Serbia has never progressed, which gave opportunities to Bulgaria and Greece here. The only reason all of these countries are not in the European Union, the main reason, I should say, is because Europe is divided on Kosovo. That is the reason. And it's so obvious people don't even think about it. So this is the source of the stasis in Serbia. It's really just the 4 NATO non-recognizers: Greece, Romania, Slovakia, Spain. This is spelled out in our report. Our report is Johns Hopkins SAIS, Wilson Center. It's called From Crisis to Convergence. From Crisis to Convergence, a strategy to tackle instability in the Balkans at its source. From Crisis to Convergence. You can see in the executive summary, it's all spelled out. Those 4 countries, Greece, Romania, Slovakia, Spain, have handed their leverage to Belgrade because they say, we won't recognize Kosovo until Belgrade does. That means Belgrade basically is like Sofia. They're basically giving their leverage. It's as if Serbia is a member of NATO or a member of the EU able to block. So all Belgrade has to do is to act as if it is participating in the dialogue, act there, get EU money, but it has no interest in resolving this issue. It has no interest in resolving it because it has the leverage. And so it continues to isolate Kosovo, to weaken Kosovo, to get derecognitions, and yet we're in a position where we need Serbia now even more. Lithium, the ammunition to Ukraine, which of course is financially beneficial to Serbia. They're not doing it as a favor to Ukraine. So that is the reason, and I just have to add, of course, that doesn't excuse Prime Minister Kurti from his own responsibilities. He has them. He has Kosovo Serb citizens, and he must treat them as full citizens, and that's true. But the structural problem is not in Pristina. The structural problem is in Belgrade and those non-recognitions. Heather, thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry. I know that we are running short of time, but I can't resist. I really do want to ask a follow-up question, because when I'm in Serbia talking to friends who have been involved with resisting Vučić in various ways, they're immensely frustrated, and something I hear again and again, sort of like this refrain, people say, no one can do anything, no one can challenge him. It's just, it's this impenetrable thing. So what would you say to that? How, please.
Sure. It's a great question. Heather, it's a terrific question. You had folks here from Belgrade earlier, but they are doing something. Yeah. And this is why he said this about, I am not Assad. I will not run away. It was in the context of the protests. That's why it was foolish, in my opinion, very foolish for him to make that comparison. But he was, I will not run away, I will serve the Serbian citizens and against all these protesters who are just Western stooges. I'm paraphrasing now, but this is essentially, his message, ridiculous message. Here the train station collapses and the people need to be motivated by Westerners. I mean, come on, it's a spontaneous and understandable anger. And it comes, and it's for a reason. It's because the people understand finally the cost of the corruption, of the relationship with China, and ultimately the point about democracy. What it is, what's the essence of democracy? It's about accountability. That's the essence of democracy. People always say transparency and accountability. It's not true. Democracy is about accountability. Not everything can be transparent. It's not true. Even democracies have to be able to have discrete conversations, and people like Julian Assange are completely wrong that you have to blow up everything. It's not true. It's about accountability. It's ultimately the accountability of the government to the governed, to the people. That's the essence of the democracy, and that's what he's being called to account on. And so there is. The answer, Heather, is they are able, even with all the disadvantages, they have shown their power. They proved it 3 years ago on lithium. which is still remains very unpopular. The mining of lithium, I hosted last week a panel of Serbian experts. This was online. Anybody can find it. We called it a Serbian lithium boon or disaster. And you can have 5 very respected Serbian experts on it explaining why it's a problem. And it's across the political spectrum there. And they forced the government 3 years ago to shelve the project. And now, of course, he was in Germany. He was with Chancellor Scholz, Vucic, and Scholz was, we need your lithium, et cetera. Well, guess what? The Serbian people have a vote in that, and they do have a vote, and that's really the point. They are not powerless in this.
Thank you so much. This is so fantastic. It really points to one of the recommendations that I know has already come in, which is that we have to take every win and draw attention to it. And if engagement is working, to show that, so that people know that it does work and it is a possibility. So thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
And it's a great segue too. And I don't know if this will work, but we have an activist, Dorotea Antic. Is she on? Or we don't have her? No. Okay.
Dorotea Antic is canceled in the last minute because of the events in Serbia. She is part of the Youth Initiative for Human Rights. Quite a few of the activists, her colleagues and friends, have been arrested, molested, and she just couldn't come because of the situation. She said, I can't participate to this event while my friends are being under pressure. She apologizes. She sends her best regards and gratitude for being invited. But you see, I mean, just proving the point that Professor Joseph has just made so eloquently. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know that. I did know that she had been held for 4 hours by the Serbian police, by plainclothes officers, questioned for 4 hours, having no idea who these people were questioning her. So, that she's going on after that and continuing her work is really incredible, even if she can't be here today with us. I'm going to see if we are with her. Yes, we are with her. Okay, I would also like to find out if we have Olga Danuliuk
yes.
online.
Can you hear me?
We do? Oh, wonderful. Okay. Olga is a Ukrainian journalist, which is, of course, not the easiest thing to be these days. She's been described as entrepreneurial and as someone who's started new initiatives, new platforms, and I would love to hear more from you. And one of the themes for this panel, I'm not sure if you heard, it's so much about exchanging best practices, for sure, anything that you've learned that you would like to share, but also I'm curious, how do people, how do all of us, but how do you in particular keep going? How do you encourage others to join and also keep going in the face of, I'm sure, anti-democratic forces? Thank you.
Yeah, hello. I hope you can hear me well. Today, yeah, I'm speaking here from Ukraine because it was very hard to get to North Macedonia, unfortunately. Yes, but I'm obviously very, very happy to be here to talk to you all and to share some of my experiences, in particular to hear your voices. I might be a little bit pragmatic today. I will talk a little bit about numbers, a little bit about some information about local media in Ukraine, because I'm not just a journalist. I'm a journalist, and currently I'm editor-in-chief of a local Ukrainian newspaper. which is located in northwest of Ukraine and borders Belarus and Poland. And I just started my position like in summer. I stepped in because my dad, who was editor-in-chief of this newspaper for a long time, now is serving in the Ukrainian army. And I will also talk about this today a little bit because this is also one of the problems that media in Ukraine are facing currently. But before that, I would like to share some, as I said, numbers and to talk a little bit about problems that media in Ukraine are facing because of war, obviously. And first of all, the main challenges are obviously a shortage of staff, psychological stress, and a lack of funding. What I wanted to say about shortage of staff is obviously because of big problem. Lots of Ukrainians evacuated, moved to European countries or just flew the country. Also, lots of Ukrainians are currently serving in the army, including my dad, who would like to be in this conference too today, but he cannot, obviously. And this is the main problem that we are facing today. And about also psychological stress, obviously. I was even today stressed to have electricity to be able to talk today online with you because, as you know, Ukraine suffers from electricity blackouts. And even now I was checking if I'm able to speak freely and normally because of that. So we're facing these very pragmatic problems, it's not something, it's something that we face every day, and it's not about theory. We face problems with democracy and threat to media in real life with real problems that we see every day, as I mentioned before, with psychological stress, obviously shortage of staff, and so on. I would also like to mention that about lack of funding, because as I mentioned before too, I'm a journalist of Northwestern local media, and for example, I would share with you that there was a study in 2024 by Media Development Foundation. This is a Ukrainian Center for Development of Independent Local Media. And they said that, for example, local media in Western and Central Ukraine receives less financial support from support than frontline regions. We were also, for example, in our media, we were thinking what we can do because, for example, only 45% of income of local editorial offices in Western regions of Ukraine have funding from donors, and they can obviously work freely and independently. And in comparison, for example, 73 of regional media in Northern Ukraine, 87 in South, and 93 in Eastern Ukraine, which is obvious because these regions suffer the most from Russian occupation, from Russian invasion, also missile attacks and so on. But this is a very bad comparison, I would say, because the whole Ukraine obviously suffers a lot in different ways from war that we are facing today. And what it causes, what's the problem, right, with this underfunding of Western also parts of Ukraine in terms of media? It's that because it creates news deserts. What is news deserts? I think you all know here that news deserts is when people in certain regions, they don't have access to information freely, so they are literally distant, they are in a bubble, they don't know what's happening. And it happens a lot in my region too, in our region, Volyn, because, for example, northern parts of our region that borders Belarus, they don't have access to Ukrainian media freely, and people there, they forced to listen to Belarusian propaganda from the border. And we also face this problem because it's hard to fight that, right? And I would like to say that obviously these news deserts, they harm the democratic development of our country, of our region also particularly. And here I would like maybe to stop, because I led you with all of these problems, right? Slowly, gradually, I led to this propaganda, right? And sometimes when I think what we can do, right? Because in Ukraine, for example, we have lots of NGOs, lots of movements, also media itself. We try to fight it with our own forces, right? We try to, when we see fake news or when we see like literal propaganda, we try to replace this, for example, even Belarusian media, we try to reach to people from northern parts of our region with our newspaper. We try to talk to them, we try to build some dialogue, but I think it's important also, besides from that, all of us, people not only from Ukraine, but also people from all over the world, in somehow we are all kind of victims of the propaganda, right? We are all kind of victims of Russian propaganda particularly. And I think one of the solutions also might sound crazy maybe, but every time you read the news, it's important to ask yourself, you know, what I'm reading now. Am I a product of Russian propaganda? Am I, what the source of information? Some basic rules, right? But it affects our perception, obviously. And also, I would like to share, I think it's important when I talk to everyone, it's important also to say, as I said before, that Ukrainians face this horrible crimes against humanity, horrible crimes against our democracy face to face. And this is, for example, in the 2 years and 9 months since the start of Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there was 762 crimes against journalists and media committed in Ukraine. And also since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war, 329 Ukrainian media outlets have shut down, according to several studies of Ukrainian NGOs who are supporting independent local media. And for example, our media, where I work as an editor-in-chief temporary, we also faced that. We face the problems, as I already mentioned, with financial support from donors abroad. We also suffer from staff shortages because 2 of our workers are in the army, including my dad, who was editor-in-chief, and our designer. We also have problems with blackouts and so on. But not only that, I think it's important also to mention that we need to somehow mobilize all together to think of ways how we can protect, for example, our regions who face northern regions of Ukraine who also face this Belarusian propaganda, and not only that, obviously, because I also wanted to mention that, for example, even our region who who is to be set rear from the front line. We also suffer from, for example, we have more air raid alerts since December because, for example, there are some military trainings in Belarus, and it also affects work schedule and just work of journalists and editorial staff because people have to hide when there is air raid siren to go to the bomb shelter. I think this is what I wanted to say, first of all, in general. And I might said lots of problems here, but as you can see, people still working, people still, as us, writing news, fighting the democracy and free regional, local media. And we still have hope that soon we will write not only about war and war crimes and casualties, deaths, and destruction, but also about free and independent future of Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving, even though I would love to ask questions, and but I will keep moving. I will go to another journalist, Petrit Saracini, who is a prominent and truly prolific journalist in Skopje. I was going to say, he's really an indispensable journalist in Skopje, but there are anti-democratic forces that would very much like to dispense with him, or at least keep him from publishing the work that he has published reliably over how many years? Over 25 years. So we're very, very lucky to have Petrit here. And look, I know it's the most broad question in the world, but I do think that it's important to think about how do people like you, how do you keep going? How do you encourage other people who might want to be independent journalists who are actually reporting on important news in a context where you're facing constant attacks, online, all sorts of attacks? How do you deal with that and keep doing what you're doing?
Thank you for your question, Heather. I would like to greet you all and to thank Civil and its partners about this opportunity for having me here. It's really a tremendous and important event. We heard a lot of good things, a lot of bad things, unfortunately, what is happening in the world, in our region. But we heard also a lot of thoughts about what are the ways, let's say, out of this situation. Obviously, we cannot be compared to Ukraine. The situation there is extremely difficult. We wish all the best to our colleagues, but also to the Ukrainian people in dealing with this aggression and let me say, unprecedented aggression of the Russian Federation towards the sovereignty and the territorial integrity, but also to the people of Ukraine. Where we cannot be compared, and in that sense, we may feel lucky that we are dealing with the problems that we are dealing with, which are very difficult also problems. Problems that people in North Macedonia and the media community face, but also the region. And let me say also Europe, which is under attack of authoritarian tendencies, of political extremism, extreme ethno-nationalism, and this has all taken toll in to the capacity of our democracies and media in general. I come here from the Institute for Media and Analytics, who is an organization that deals with disinformation, hate speech, discrimination and violation of human rights in our country. I would like to focus especially on dealing with disinformation, because I think that that is the main threat to the security of our countries, to the stability of our countries, but also to the very existence of the professional media as we knew them in the past, but as we would hope to see them existing in the future as a key or the main pillar watchdog of democracy. Our institute has been working on debunking and dealing with disinformation. We were producing lots of analyses, debunking, fact-checking stories. We were also the only organization in the region to produce, jointly with a national TV station, Alsat, a short TV show of 10 minutes, which was debunking most actual information in the media and the public discourse. I think it's the only example in the region. And we still believe that the fight against disinformation should be mainstream, and that the media, professional media outlets, influential media outlets, mainstream media outlets should be at the forefront of this struggle, because, let's be frank, civil society organizations, fact-checking organizations are doing a great job, but they are unable to reach mainstream audiences. And what we are seeing is that this disinformation industry that is undermining democracies, attacking human rights, producing violence, hate speech in the societies, is predominantly threatening the professional media. It is taking audiences from them. And if it continues like this, most of the media outlets, professional media outlets, as we see, the newsrooms are shrinking. Lots of them are having difficulty surviving, and many of them would be closing any time now if this continues to be the case, if they don't take part, let's say, a more active part in this fight against disinformation. Just to mention an example of how this works, and to connect it also with Ukraine. Last year, a tweet on X now, former Twitter, said that the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, was welcomed to the United Nations General Assembly by a billboard on the streets of New York, which read, "Glory to Urine," instead of "Glory to Ukraine." This tweet was published by a notorious profile on Twitter who was used by the Russian propaganda for obvious reasons. And then it got picked up by lots of media in Serbia. And then this piece of disinformation was published by over 30 media outlets in North Macedonia, including 2 national TV stations. And regardless of the fact that that we had a fact-checking piece on that, and there were also international prominent media such as Reuters and the Associated Press fact-checking services who debunked this disinformation, our media outlets, among them several who define themselves as professional and who have newsrooms and people who could do this fact check, didn't even bother to check whether this is true or not. We saw this piece of disinformation later appear on the Telegram channel of Zakharova, and it was obviously a manipulated image from a billboard that never existed. The company that owns the billboard issued a statement for one of the fact-checking services that it never happened, and that they didn't have a billboard for Ukraine at all. But nevertheless, our media outlets published it, including 2 national TV stations, several news media, online media outlets that are deemed by the public as professional and credible media outlets. So if this is happening for a piece that is not so, let's say, not so important, but just, let's say, a clickbait that taps into the beliefs and the let's say, the dominant belief of a great portion of the Macedonian public, what happens when we face more challenging stories, events, incidents that happen in our country more and more frequently. We have seen the effects of disinformation during the time of the Prespa agreement. We have seen what disinformation, they produced violence and violent protests. We have seen, not to speak about the year before that and what happened with the disinformation and notorious nationalistic propaganda, which at the end culminated with the attack on the assembly on the 27th of April. We have seen that that type of disinformation produced hate speech and violence during the so-called French agreement and the compromise that led to, let's say, opening the negotiations of North Macedonia with the EU in its first stage. And we are seeing it, what it can produce nowadays with the recent rise of tensions, interethnic tensions in our country. So we can see that disinformation and these attacks on democracy and human rights, not only on interethnic issues, not only related to NATO and the anti-Western propaganda produced by Russia, some media outlets in Serbia, but also by domestic political actors. We have very active, even parliamentary parties, also non-parliamentary political parties that openly propagate and use this information to attack NATO, EU, generally the Western concept and democracies. We see spread of anti-gender disinformation, disinformation against vulnerable minorities, marginalized groups, and I'm afraid that we, democratic societies, are not able still to find a solution to these problems. I mean, just imagine what can you do in a 30-second video on TikTok. How many disinformation? You can spread 5 sentences, each containing disinformation. To debunk those disinformation, you would need a thorough research, finding the facts, telling it why it's not true, and you cannot put it in 30 seconds. Also, these are very clickable, very sensationalistic pieces of content. They tap into the beliefs, previously formative beliefs of the people, and they tap to the habit of the audience, which is becoming more and more dominant, this confirmation bias. People simply seek and watch the media and the content that confirms their beliefs. In this sense, it's very difficult for pro-democratic forces to counter this harsh propaganda and overwhelming flood of disinformation content. It's very difficult because if you want to do it, you have to use their tools, and that's not democracy. That's not what we are about. So what are some of the possible solutions? Mainstreaming the fight against disinformation, as I said, coalitions between civil society, fact-checking organizations, and mainstream media. That should be something that should be the focus also of the international donor community, because yes, social networks are becoming more and more dominant in the way people consume content, but if this content is more professionally produced by professional TV stations, professional newsrooms, etc., and if they use their strong channels also on social media to spread this content, I think that they can somehow counter this flood of, I don't know, influencers, podcasters, YouTubers, etc., who are being used as tools for spreading propaganda and disinformation. Also, what we are not seeing, and which is very important, is a more consistent and active role of institutions in this regard. The only part of the society in North Macedonia that is fighting disinformation is civil society organizations. We are not seeing concrete actions from the institutions, from the media or other parts of society. We are constantly speaking on these types of events about whole society approach. Unfortunately, it is not happening, and that's something that should happen. On the long term, of course, we can speak about media literacy, about interventions through education, because our education, our books in the primary and secondary education system are filled with disinformation and outdated disinformation. We need an enormous effort to fix those and incorporate media literacy in the whole, in all the subjects, not just as some voluntary course in some of the stages of education. Let's not forget that disinformation industry, people, anti-democratic forces, it was mentioned here also, they use lots of money, they invest lots of money, lots of human resources in what they do for their personal political gain, for their gain of their companies, etc. You cannot, it's like facing an army who is coming to you with tanks, with guns, with nuclear weapons, and you are taking out swords and horses on them. So this is not the way to deal, to enter this fight. This fight should have adequate human and financial resources if we want to be successful. If not, I'm afraid that I don't have such a optimistic picture about what is going to happen in future. Also with the impacts of social media, artificial intelligence, the degrading of professional media, degrading of education throughout the world, I think that we are going to face more and more difficult times before we come to grasp with reality and maybe try to make a more active fight against threats to democracy and human rights. Sorry, maybe I took too long, but...
You didn't, but this is wonderful. Thank you. I don't know if you answered my initial question, but I'm really happy with the answer that you provided because it was much more substantive than what maybe you might have said. It was fantastic, truly. And this idea of media literacy education in schools is such a good one, and you would just need the schools to somehow agree.
And the state to agree, because if you want to put it in the formal education system.
Yes.
Sometimes the state doesn't want to, because it produces critical thinkers who would be voters tomorrow. I don't think politicians like that very much.
No. Okay, well, I'm going to move on because I think that we should, in the interest of time, to Astrid Istrefi, who has had a long career in civil society in the Balkans. He's coming to us from Kosovo and was recently the director of the Balkan Forum, which is an organization that brings together partner organizations across the Balkans to discuss things like green policy, green energy. So of course, I'm dying to ask you questions about how do you do that? How do you get organizations from across the Balkans to kind of set aside probably very large differences in order to find common ground, but perhaps you have something prepared already and you would really like to talk about it, and I don't want to stop you from doing that, so please. Thank you.
Is it on? Yes. So thank you very much, Heather. I shall admit, though, that I have failed in my mission, but Balkan Forum didn't fail yet. So, but I'll say a couple of words, and if you allow me, as I would like to just, highlight 3 issues that concern the discussion that we are having here, and it's about actions and strategies, but also about the sources. Now, first of all, I would like to really thank Civil and all of Civil's partners. It's not the only event. I think it's determination and it's courage that should be celebrated, that Civil colleagues have, and many do not. being under attack, being threatened, being, in all sorts of situations that takes a toll on their lives and on the lives of their families. So proud to be here. But let me tell you what my views are. When we are talking about the actions and strategies, I think, there should be a matter of prioritization. And the prioritization may mean, well, what is it that should be addressed and should be addressed now, immediately? Because that is having the highest impact in Europe and wider world. And second would be what could be mid to long term, medium to long term. The one that we should recognize, and I think we should recognize also the inaction, is that people in Ukraine, every second is life or death. And it's 3 years since 2022, but it's 10 years since 2014. And I think our freedoms, our freedom, our democracy, our security is threatened by Russia. And we cannot say we stand by Ukraine. I think we should say Ukraine should win the war, not we will stop the war, but Ukraine should win the war, and we will help them. And Russia should be defeated. I think that is really critical. We were talking here about empathy. We were talking here about kindness. I think it depends, whom do you show that empathy or kindness? To whom? To Russia? How? Nobody can say that we will beg Russia to stop the war and they will just leave. They will never do it. They have to be defeated. They have to. Wars in former Yugoslavia did not stop because somebody was begging, because we should have shown force. Not we could not, as Albanians in former Yugoslavia, nor Bosnians could do that, but someone did. And that was United States, that was NATO countries that put an end to the war. And I think that should be act now, for the sake of all of us, but mostly for the sake of people in Ukraine, that every second for them is life or death. I think where we stand now, it's just repeating the same things that we have been saying for such a long time. I may say I'm the youngest one here in the panel, but I have 50 years, half a century, of life experience in the Western Balkans and work experience on peace building. And I failed on the second. Life still going on. But let me tell you one thing. We are talking about disinformation, and we are talking about far-right nationalism. I don't think it mattered 30 years ago whether it's far-right, is it extreme, is it whatever. What it mattered, that we had a problem, and that problem led to a bloody war, led to ethnic cleansing, and led to genocide. And what we are living today is everything less of that. And it should be a recognition that Western Balkans cannot be usual business. I think when we talk about European integration, there should be bold steps made to ensure that EU accession is successful, and NATO accession for the countries that want to join. There is, by the way, one country that doesn't want to join, one or the other. But I think for the other countries, there should be more bold steps and decisions made. And I think this may be a weakness that authoritarian leaders recognize. They do recognize. You need European Union to talk for 10 years, whether it's good to act on this or that. You don't need Putin. And I'm not saying Europe should become Putin, But I'm just saying that if we recognize the threat, if we are able to anticipate what's coming up, then we should act quicker than that and more boldly than that. And I think, you know, what we are losing in the Western Balkans, we are losing young people. And with that, we are losing a new generation of young people, of young leaders who may as well strengthen the democracy in our countries and also build a different vision for the Western Balkans. We don't have them. The longer than it takes, the longer less democracy we will have and more authoritarianism we will have. It is proven in the last 5 years there is less democracy and more authoritarian tendencies in the Western Balkans. I think the other one, and this is my theory, when we talk about disinformation, it's about narrative. Who constructs and owns the narrative? I think for all of us, for the rest of us, I think we would agree that democracy means something. And what it means, we feel those are the fundamental values that we are fighting for. And we are fighting for those common values for ourselves, for Europe and European Union. But for Orban, democracy is something different. He owns that narrative. For Fico, democracy is something different to us. And they are demonstrating every day. And for some other leaders, democracy is, I don't want to go to that direction, but I think it's the narrative. We don't own the narrative. We don't produce the narrative. Therefore, we are losing the fight. And if we are trying to debunk whatever disinformation is out there and try to counter it, we just cannot do it. Because we are not owning the narrative. And I think our narrative should prevail. And the last one, many mentioned here the political opposition, and I would agree that political opposition has an important role to play to defend democracy, to defend human rights. But there is one thing, and this is specific to our context and to this geographical space, and this is connected to our recent history. Political opposition would want to gain power, but when it comes to disputes, to tensions, to conflicts with other nations, they do not have a completely different view on how the issues may be resolved. Political opposition in Greece would not have the same with the one in North Macedonia. We had some leaders, and I think we lost that momentum, we did not capitalize on that, but not the political opposition. I think we are making a big mistake. That is not the same in Serbia, that is not the same in Bosnia. I think we should recognize that it's good for the democracy of those countries. The more democracy there is, hopefully the less conflict there is, but that they do not hold a different, completely different view to what those nationalists have in mind. And when it comes to Western Balkans, I think if we are talking about war, if we are talking about violent conflict, I will say it is possible. I have lived enough in this country to say that it is possible. If we are seeing terrorist acts happening and people being killed by armed groups, it is possible. The only thing that nobody can say for sure is the scale. But that violence can happen, war can happen once again in Western Balkans. Just quickly, I know I spoke too much, but a personal experience, because I think it's important for people to understand. For about over 30 years, I have been working with colleagues across the region to build bridges between different ethnic groups. And I continued with so much hope, believing that that is holding, until 2022, when I failed. And it was people, it was colleagues that I knew for over 25 years. It was not colleagues anymore. It was friends. It was friendships. But I realized that from the ones who were consuming disinformation propaganda, we turned into sources of that. And that was the only time that I was angry with myself. I was so disappointed with myself. I didn't give up, but I failed in that. And I recognized it 30 years later. I still have some energy to go on with it, but I think we should recognize even that fact that projects may be supported by different donors. What remains at the source, at the DNA of conflicting parties, cannot go away with projects that are superficial, that deal with some of the issues of common concern, but do not go deeper into the roots of the problem. And I think we have neglected that for 25, 30 years, and that is haunting us back. But just to end with this, I think there are two, if I can say, recommendations at least. I don't know whether these resonate with anyone else, but resonate with me, is that we should not stop building alliances across the borders, across the ethnic groups, across the Atlantic, to fight for democracy, to fight for human rights, to fight for freedom. And second is, I think we have to be smarter into building our own narratives in what democracy is and what we fundamentally, with all our human beings, believe is. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. And I think you are completely right that it doesn't pay to just try to build common ground when there is the presence of racism and especially in the groups that you might be partnering with. You could end up legitimizing certain groups and processes, and yeah, I think you're right about that. Thank you. I think we'll move on to Javier Durala. This is our last guest, and I'm really our last guest, our guest and our host. And I'm happy that you're all still here, or most of you are all still here. As we know, Javier is the founder and president of Civil, our host organization for this event, not the only host organization for this event. And in addition to being a human rights leader, he is a journalist and an editor. I've known Javier for 20 years now, since 2003, and I want to say all sorts of positive things about his use of art and his encouragement of local democratic culture, and the amazing story of really searching him out. See, now I do have to tell this, but really searching him out in 2003 because I saw the work that Civil was doing. I saw, posters and pins that people were wearing on their clothes and stickers that were like in restaurant doors, all encouraging people to give up their weapons because Macedonia was recovering from a thankfully short-lived but very painful civil war, but encouraging people to disarm. And I just thought it was beautiful, and so I really had to look for this person who was creating this art, and so the rest is history. We did meet, and I've known him ever since. But it's not really the tone that's the proper tone for this panel. I mean, this is a very serious panel, and we've been discussing Ukraine quite a lot, and so what I want to mention is that Javier received the Order of Merit from Ukrainian President Zelensky last year for his work in, it's so emotional, for his work in keeping Ukraine in the news in North Macedonia, making sure that people don't forget, that people aren't confused about right and wrong, which is, of course, so difficult to do right now. So anyway, I want to ask, what is next for Civil? We were going to discuss, the history of Civil and the president of Civil and what's next for Civil. And so I'll just let you take over.
Well, thank you. First of all, I am not, and I have never been alone. Those people over there deserve the greatest applause, actually. It's them who make me go on. It's the people like this panel and the other panels. Those people over there who also supported our ideas and our strive for the truth. And I'll just make a couple of points there about the truth. It's only one. I'm sorry to say that. There is one truth based on facts. There are 100 million truths about one fact, but only if people's minds have been distorted, manipulated, oppressed, intimidated, blurred, or threatened. But the truth is there. Objective, one truth. Russia is the aggressor. Ukraine is defending itself. Or in our everyday life, police is beating peaceful demonstrators. And then a certain prime minister would come out and say, police has been defending itself from the violent demonstrators who actually have fell victim of foreign agents, like Santa Claus, for instance. I've heard last night at the evening with our friends from Germany and Italy and UK and Europe that there was this Duma member who proposed that Santa Claus needs to be banned in Russia because he's a symbol of foreign agentry. And, these are facts that this happened. And you can't escape it, no matter what you do. I've heard here many facts all day. And they cannot be moved. They can be manipulated. They can be distorted. They can be shut down. Our media platform is under cyber attack every day and night. Now it's even cheap to do it. At the time, we costed those who were attacking us 7,000 euros per day. Now we cost them 200 euros because of the advancement of the technology and the availability of technology. So invest a little, gain a lot. That's the main line of business of the propagandists. They invest very little. It's very easy to cause nationalism, hatred. It's very easy to turn youngsters and even minors into cannon fodder of hate and violence, like sport fan clubs. And it starts there. It can start anywhere and then arrive to what I heard here is called their victory, because we retreated. We got blindfolded by fear, by commercial interests, economic interests, or just because of some prejudices. And we cannot do that. And we cannot allow ourselves anymore because we ain't no time anymore. We ran out of time. And, well, thank you. Your words about our work, not mine, but our work still echoes in my mind, sorry. But I just want to say that the front line is in Ukraine. People are being killed there, being kidnapped. There is a systemic use of torture, rape, and looting civilian targets. Also, the front line is not finishing there. The front line is also where our friend and colleague Katya is, what she's doing there, because we are on the front line of the truth. If we break, help is not going to come. If we break, politicians will say, well, the Poles say that I should stop supplying Ukraine with weapons, I should stop supplying North Macedonia with civil society institutional building grants, or I should stop sending humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Because the Poles say so. And the Poles depend on how much people believe in what they see, or how much it is blurred by those that have interest to win, to the enemies of democracy and human rights. Therefore, thanks to the great advice of quite a few people, amongst them many are in this room, Civil, to answer your question, will intensify its work across the borders in the region, and not only in the region of the Western Balkans, but in the region beyond the borders of Western Balkans, which is in trouble. Let me reiterate that, I think. And also, Civil plans to enter the war against war in Ukraine, or at least that's the working title of our efforts, because after the war, there is another war. We've seen it in Bosnia, we've seen it in Kosovo, that the war after the war lasts even longer than any war. We had a six months long skirmish in comparison to what it was in Bosnia and in Kosovo and in Croatia. But we still live through it every day and night. So that's what we want to do, to go there, offer our knowledge, offer our hearts and our minds, and we'll be available to any spot in the world that our knowledge and experience and our commitment will be requested. At the end, I'm certain that Putin will lose eventually. What we need to do is not to let Putinism win, and that's the greatest risk. Putin will fall. Putinism must fall too. Thank you. Going to say something?
Yes. Would you?
If I can say
yes, please.
Just one thing. I think, you know, that I don't know why it happens, but I think we forget that wars that we experienced 25, 30 years ago here in this space were not only in Croatia and Bosnia and Kosovo. There was a conflict in North Macedonia. There was a conflict in South Serbia. So I think it's you know, just going with that in mind, that when we talk about democracy and when we talk about disinformation and what can or cannot happen, we have to have that in mind. We have the recent history, but we have legacy, which is as old as centuries, which is exploiting people who do not have that history and poisoning them with hatred may be a bit more challenging, but not in this space. It's not. Our kids were raised with lullabies, either defending their own country or fighting against some enemy. An enemy is always a neighbor. Sorry, Jabir. I didn't want to. Well, thank you.
To add what I was saying before about the effects of this propaganda and disinformation. A couple of researches last year and the year before that on the perception of the citizens on disinformation showed that people believe that NATO and EU are spreading equally or even more disinformation than Russia. That's the belief of our citizens. Also, whether North Macedonia should provide military aid to Ukraine, more people are against that than are for that. There is also almost equal belief that who is to be blamed about the war in Ukraine, that Russia and NATO are more or less equally to blame about the war in Ukraine. Also another research, it hasn't been done recently, but some years ago, is that 49% of the people believe that democracy is not the right system. Only 51%, I mean cumulatively, believe that it is very functional or more or less functional, but 49% would ask for another system. And this was before all this research was, before all these events that happened recently in the recent history of Macedonia, and I believe that that number of anti-democratic forces has grown. These are serious threats to democracy in North Macedonia. People are discouraged, intimidated. To answer your question, the consequences on attacks on journalists and human rights activists and activists in general are tremendous. Lots of us have stopped talking, stopped writing, discouraged themselves from actively participating in the public discourse because you are being attacked by orchestrated and organized hundreds of comments of people who are obviously the same people that are supporting these right-wing extremist political options. And if you see no defense on that behalf, even frequently some other political options use the civil society and political and civil society activists as an umbrella to shield themselves from attacks against themselves. Okay, these are the activists here, they are spitting on them now, and we are more okay with our position. And this has resulted in a great portion of our progressive thinkers, intellectuals, journalists, to just, discourage, become more and more detached from the public discourse and from writing, from explaining things to the audience. And this opens a great space for those that are against democracy and human rights in our country. And I think that it's going to become worse and worse. We have had the misfortune of history repeating itself in the Balkans. Look what happened to Serbia after Milosevic, and look what happened to North Macedonia after Gruevski. Those forces that were for integration in the European Union and in NATO against nationalism simply lost the elections. What has won the elections in North Macedonia is ethnic polarization, ethno-nationalism, divisive discourse, divisions in the society on ethnic, gender, and other bases. And this is something that people should take into account. I'm discouraged that it's going to be better in the near future, but for the further future, I have optimism that we will gather our strengths and prevail.
Elections are also won by Russian operations of influence, by Russian subversive operations of changing people's minds, attitudes, and behavior. And we have to admit that sooner than later, as much as we should have admitted that fact decades ago, at least one or a little bit more than 1 decade ago, when we saw the little green men in the Crimean Peninsula popping out, and they are still there. And of course, all these operations are not paid by the Kremlin. Unintentionally, these operations that go through media, but also through the civil society, are paid by the Western taxpayers. And these operations are also going through the avenue of influence that comes from Belgrade, but also directly from the church in Russia, via the church in North Macedonia or in Serbia or in Greece or whatever. It also comes through the Muslim community, through the Islamic religious community, through the great friends of Russia in the Middle East, through Tehran. And we need to acknowledge that sooner than later, otherwise it will be even darker, but so dark that we wouldn't be able to find the switch and put on the light. But of course, I agree with my friends and with my colleague Petrit. It's going to be even darker, yes. And what? The night is the darkest before dawn and before the sunrise. Unfortunately, there will be many more grim hours when I only think of how many children in Kyiv or Kharkiv tonight will stop being children, hearing the horrendous sounds of missiles. It doesn't give me a lot of peace. But what I think we should do, and maybe you can add it to the document together with my colleagues of Civil and from Media Dialogue and the New European People's Forum, we need to recommit, and the ways are easy. We need to recommit through dialogue, through calling people, through writing letters, through making long, if necessary, long conversations, through disagreeing or through agreeing about at least some basic values. And I have to say that these last words I'm pronouncing are actually thanks to the conversations I had yesterday with our friends from Germany, from / Italy, Europe, UK, from Ukraine, from Belarus, / Poland, / Europe, and Kosovo, and my friends and compatriots. Europe is enough, that's right. Europe is okay. I'm getting out of this room more optimistic, more energized than when I got in. And I can assure you, I will recommit to human rights and to democracy even more than ever before, because I think this recommitment is needed more than ever before. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to invite Petrit or Astrid, if you would like to say anything. One last thing. Okay, you have. Okay. Thank you all for staying with us. This has been a really fantastic discussion. I think that closes the conference. Would you like to say anything to just close the conference?
We at Civil have one, well, more than one slogans, but one of them that comes to my mind right now after 25 years is that we never surrender. One more thing, I would like to quote my dear colleague Dehran, who on the day when we had a coffee and a cigarette, sorry, it was in the office? No cigarettes. No, sorry, there was no cigarette, only coffee. You know, he came to me and he said, Jabir, let it be congratulated for these 25 years. Happy 25th anniversary. We will count another 25 years, but after that, let history count it. And I was so, you know, emotional when I heard that, and I keep repeating it. And I think that these words of Dehran should be the closure of this conference. Thank you very much, Dehran. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, civilians. And thank you all. And thank you, Wolfgang, for making this happen. Thank you.